So I'm fully cognizant how dehydrated and hypoglycemic and alcoholemic everybody is. So I'm going to be very cognizant of getting through this quickly and not be as ambitious as I was 3 hours ago when I finalized these slides. So first of all, I was going to go through the physician-scientist workforce report because I think there's some relevance to this, to the discussions we had today. How many of you have heard of this report? So it's fairly well known, so I'm not going to belabor it, but if you haven't heard of it, I would recommend that you look at it, and depending on your vantage point, if you're a veterinarian, you might be interested in some of the findings. But one of the really significant components is that physician scientists were defined in this report as scientists with professional degrees who have training in clinical care who are engaged in biomedical research, including individuals with a bunch of things, but a DVM or a veterinarian. So I think the relevance of that is that any initiatives or RFPs or program announcements that come out of this initiative that use the context of physician scientists, veterinarians will be qualified to submit applications for those proposals. So that I think was a really exciting part of this report. And Michael referred to this report earlier, and I think Jim Fox will be talking about it a bit tomorrow with training. Just a couple of highlights that I wanted to point out. We've been talking a little bit about numbers of people in the biomedical research workforce. This report, through a variety of means, identified about 9,000 physician scientists in all the groups that were evaluated. About 4,200 were MDs. About 4,100 had both an MD and a PhD. And I'll just point out that MD, PhD training is almost always concurrent. It's not usually sequential like the veterinary training tends to be. Only 253 of these were veterinarians. So it's a really small percentage of the workforce. And if you look at approximately 100,000 veterinarians total, only 4,000 of those, or 4%, are in academia, and only 3% of those hold NIH grants. So we're talking about a very small segment of our population. And then there were some observations about male-female RPG, or our independent research awards, being very skewed towards male veterinarians, even though there's so many of us out there are women. And then, of course, the observation that veterinary education really focuses on clinical practitioners because that's what our students tend to want and what the public thinks of us is doing. So just to put that in context, if we've got one veterinarian and we're looking at the medical science, the MD workforce, there's about 10x more of those. Or if you're considering PhD workforce, there's about 10x more of those too. So we're a little teeny percentage of the physician sciences workforce. I think we can make a huge impact, but I think our expectations of what we can produce has to be a bit tempered by our capacity and just sheer numbers. So I'm not going to go through these. These are all in the publication. I did want to point out something we haven't really talked about today, that nearly 50% of NIH-funded research uses animal models in some context. Even though we have so few veterinarians engaged at least as PIs. Now, there are definitely more veterinarians engaged in the support process for research, but I think when you look at the numbers of NIH competing grants that used animals, and this is somewhat old, but I doubt it's gone down very much, but the percentage of grants using animals is well over 50%. So who knows about animals? Well, you would hope that veterinarians know a lot about animals in comparative medicine because that's how we're trained and that's what we do. And whether that's animals that have induced or naturally occurring diseases, I would argue that that's why we are important for the biomedical workforce and for what we're calling the One Health movement. And then I would throw in field ecology or diseases that are occurring in the ecosystem, which we also often are usually in animals or mostly in animals and wildlife, and veterinarians would be equipped to know about that to a fair degree as well. So, and then a point that was just made in this last section, which I thought was fascinating, even though I'm a little hypoglycemic and dehydrated, is that I think animal model selection or parallel diseases or whatever we want to call them, that's really what's going to underlie the success of translational science or translational medicine. Are we choosing the right systems, presuming we can't do everything in vitro, to advance science and to assist the patient? And here are the more commonly considered laboratory animals. And my background is in lab animal medicine, so these are the ones we typically hear about. But then I think maybe given today's talks, we have to broaden our perspective about what are we talking about when we're talking about animal use in research. So Michael went through these. These are challenges facing our workforce, besides the fact that we don't have very many of us compared to other professional or physician scientists. And these were some recommendations specifically in terms of including veterinary scientists in applications using animals. I think that's a very sensible recommendation. Expand programs for training of veterinarians concurrent with research and veterinary school, and try to use this to recruit more women scientists, because let's face it, 80% of the students coming through the pipeline now are women, and it might be a good way to increase the numbers of women scientists with our awards. There are many other recent studies that echo this sentiment that we could have more veterinarians within the research infrastructure, and this is from National Academy of Sciences to AVMA to AAVMC, and they all come to more or less the same conclusion. Whether we're over capacity in other sectors, we're typically under capacity, or some of our better salaried colleagues are ones that are working in the research arena. For the last few comments, I want to throw out a couple things that have been running through my mind in terms of this summary. And I would argue, and many of you may not agree with me, but that we're running a little bit of a risk by using the umbrella that has everything under it. Because One Health is confusing, and if we continue to call everything we do One Health, it won't necessarily distinguish ourselves for funding opportunities, or it'll be confusing to other people we're talking to. So I don't know if this is possible, but if there's a way to maybe separate what we focused on today, the translational medicine or One Medicine, which is a comparative approach of advancing biomedicine for both human and animals, versus the intersection of human, animal, environmental health. So maybe this one here is a much bigger issue relating to what the USDA and CDC were talking about. It includes this circle here, the environment. That almost seems like a whole nother discipline to me, and you can maybe summarize it as big problems requiring transdisciplinary solutions among engineers and sociologists and many other disciplines than maybe this one can get away with. So that's just throwing that out there for some fodder for you to think about. And then we didn't talk too much today about this circle here, the PhD, but I think that's a big circle. There's a lot of workforce there, and certainly we rely on that sector for coming up with the more biological, biochemical changes that can really influence health outcomes and genomics, and this may also include bioinformaticists, et cetera. So we haven't really talked about that much today, and I just wanted to bring it up as that's an important component of what we've been talking about. And then I was able to get this picture together after Dr. Henry's talk in terms of out-of-the-box thinking. And this is something that bothers me a little bit because of my area of study, which is feline immunodeficiency virus. But one thing that I've always found remarkable is there's a pretty well-done publication from 2010 showing that FIV vaccine that's commercially available and had been commercially available for several years at this time has a preventative fraction of 71% against heterologous strains in a natural transmission model. And that's a really fabulous output. And while I have colleagues who have tried to submit grants to really evaluate what underlies that protection, this is one example of something that veterinarians know on a day-to-day basis that we're not really able to exploit for one reason or another in a way that could be really transformative to a lot of really important health issues for people. So certainly the SIV model is really important, and the work that's been done in that system has been great, but not only do cats get lentiviruses, but so do sheep and goats, and we can learn things from those. And veterinarians, again, would know about those type of circumstances. We did talk about comparative oncology, which would be maybe our model for translational science, and how do we expand this into other realms, because it's certainly, at least at the bottom step of moving up the ladder of what I think we're talking about today. And we talked about rare diseases being an important niche we could potentially occupy with these models, including Niemann-Pick and HTLV and muscular dystrophy that were talked about. And these would fall into the realm of rare diseases, which, because they're rare, there are just attributes of this that may make them more easily studied in the natural animal model system. But then we didn't really talk about this today, and that's there are things that occur in veterinary medicine like obese cats that we're not really recruiting into clinical trials, but certainly these there are these other issues that occur in the human population in large numbers that we're not really, I haven't heard too many people talk about using those as animal models, natural animal models, where they might be highly relevant. And sometimes these are things that we don't really consider a great risk to our companion animals, but certainly they do exist, and we could develop clinical trials to exploit these as well, both for the health of the veterinary patients and human patients. So this workshop has been mentioned a couple times. I just wanted to advertise it for Rod one more time. This workshop has not been mentioned that I can remember, but last November, the Institute for Lab Animal Resources held a workshop on oversight of veterinary clinical trials, and I understand there's a paper coming out that summarizes best practices for what you might call the animal IRB. So we had a little conversation about this, but I think in the context of what the CTAs might be looking for if there were to be a collaborative proposal, or just for best practices, or to eliminate some of the confusion that I know occurs at our institution when you have an animal clinical trial with client-owned animals going through the IACUC, that this would maybe some guidance in the future that will be helpful. So I think there's a lot of momentum around this issue. It's very exciting to me. I think veterinarians with the broad comparative training lends our discipline to be able to play a leadership role in both the One Health that has the environment and the One Health that doesn't have as much environment. And I think it seems like there's more interest and excitement about this, both of those realms now than there has been for the amount of time that I've been paying attention to it, which I think is a while. But I do think that it would be really fruitful to come up with some tangible steps we can take, even if they're small steps, to capitalize on this so we don't have another conference in a couple years and refer to yet another report that's come out of it. So that's my discussion points. And
so I took about 8 pages of notes, and I have 34 bullets that I need to talk to you about, but we'll go quickly. No, I actually don't. So, so I'm going to keep this really brief and cut it down to 2 slides. The first one is a thank you to the folks who've organized this workshop. I know this isn't the end of the workshop, but I thought you said it well this morning when you said that ORIP can be a convener, a coordinator, and a bridge builder. And I think it's up to us and the people that we've heard today who've done a fabulous job of going through the diversity of some of the opportunities to build partnerships with NIH and to help NIH identify and deploy their resources in a way that really can impact One Health teams and One Health outcomes. So that's... This is the last slide, and that is, and maybe it's just because I've spent a lot of my life teaching, I think a key to what we have to do at this point is really and truly to focus on the next generation and to make a new breed of student that doesn't think of themselves as a doctor or a vet or, but thinks of themselves as a member of a health professional team to figure out a way to develop curricula that in fact do integrate so seamlessly that students don't resist it, that medical students, veterinary students see it as very attractive cross-training opportunities. I think Andrew Lackner said it when he said labels can get in the way, focus on expertise, not degrees, and address problems with the most effective teams. If we do that, we will eventually get to where we want to be in terms of One Health. And I think what we've seen today has absolutely demonstrated that beyond a shadow of a doubt, and I think we'll see more of that tomorrow. So thank you very much. Thank you, Manuel Morrow. And I guess I'll let you close, or you can all head for your first glass of wine.